Here on Saturday the 17th of July 2004 with Private Jack Inky Wiltshire, VX117332, 39th Battalion Headquarter Company. First of all, Jack, I'd like to ask you, how did you come to be called Inky?
Well, that's quite a long story, but my father owned a watercolour business that made art materials and all sorts of inks, like rubber stamp ink and writing inks and lots of other sort of Indian ink and all those sort of inks. There are a lot of different ones. And during the war, they supplied the canteens with writing ink for the kids, for the fellows to write home with. One of the ingredients that they used in the blue-black writing ink, which wrote blue and dried black, that's the idea of it, it came from Germany. But as we're at war with Germany, they couldn't get the ingredients. So ICI sold them some other, some material which was supposed to do the same thing. And so they made the ink like that, which they sent to the canteens. The canteens sent it all around to the troops, and what happened, they wrote blue and then dried out altogether and disappeared off, so it was invisible ink. It didn't dry black as it should have. And a load of that came to our battalion, the 39th Battalion, and somebody knew that I was connected with it. So everybody had a bottle of Indian ink, a bottle of blue-black writing ink, tossed it down to my tin, so I got labelled with inky. So here you are, there's another bottle of inky, and so it all was tossed in our shed. So that's how it came about.
Were you conscripted into the 22nd Battalion or did you volunteer?
I volunteered.
And why did you volunteer?
Well, it was a war on, and the Japs wanted to take over Australia. I didn't agree with that, so I was prepared to go and fight again to stop them.
Was the 22nd a militia unit?
22nd Battalion was, at that time, was the militia battalion, the one that I went in, but there was another 22nd, second 22nd, which was in Rabaul, and they fell with Rabaul, and the Japs overran them in Rabaul, and they were mainly taken prisoners.
So how old were you when you first joined up?
I was 21.
And where was your camp in the 22nd?
The 22nd was at just out of Seymour. There's a big mountain there, and I just can't think of the name of it, but right up on the side you could see from the train this mountain that it had in white letters right across the top, whatever battalion was there, in white stones, and it was the 22nd when I was there.
Did you remember anyone that you enlisted with at the time, and who were your best mates?
Well, I think Pulfer, Bunny Pulfer would be the most.
How did you come to join the 39th Battalion?
Well, they called for volunteers to go to New Guinea to fight the Japanese. Bunny and I both volunteered. We were in the HAC platoon of the 22nd Battalion, and the two of us volunteered. And from there, at this time, we'd moved up to Albury at Ponegilla. And we volunteered, and then we had to come all the way back down to Darley. And there we were first into Darley. And that's when it started. They were forming the 39th Battalion at Darley.
So what do you remember of the camp at Darley at the time? What was it like?
Oh, just the same as mostly any other army camp. There were tents. We all had tents, and there were six to two. Maybe I might be wrong. I might have gone into huts at Darley, but I'd been in tents before, so I made a mistake there. No, it was huts for the first time, and we were just given a bundle of straw and a bag, and that was a palliasse, and you made your bed on that.
Now, what was your training there?
Training?
What sort of training did you do?
From my point of view, when we went in there, as I mentioned before, that my big brothers had taught me to drive, and most young fellows at that stage couldn't drive motor cars or didn't have motor cars, and I was lucky in that respect. And they came around to our platoon and they asked if anybody could drive, because they had all those trucks that had just been issued and no one could drive them. And so I said yes, I was able to drive. And I went out there and they had all these trucks, and I demonstrated I could drive. And the fellow that was a lieutenant from the First World War was in charge of it, and he was, I've lost his name.
No, that doesn't matter.
I know it well too.
It doesn't matter.
And we were great friends, because I was his first driver, and he ran the battalion, ran the platoon transport. Gale, he was lieutenant.
Darley, I'd like you to tell us the story about you and your mate Bunny, about the wet mess.
Yeah, well, it was really a bit difficult, because I'd been growing up in Surrey Hills and with a family that sort of looked after me pretty well, where Bunny, a friend I'd met in the army, came from Footscray, and he knew his way about the world, and we both travelled, we both volunteered to go to the 39th, and we travelled down on train to Darley. And when arriving at Darley, Bunny said to me, "There's a wet canteen here, we've got to go and have a beer." And I said, "Well, I don't drink beer, here you go." And so he went off to have a few beers. And having a long day, I got my palliasse and I went to sleep on there. Later on the night, Bunny woke me up and said, Jack, quick, give us your hat." Which I found my hat and gave it to him, and he was sick into it. And he filled up my brand new slouched hat with his spew. And so that was introduction. But he was such a nice bloke. He got me a new hat next day and looked after me very well.
But when you were in the 39th, then did your training, did you do a lot more training? Was there rifle training?
Well, I didn't do much about that. As again, I'd grown up with big brothers who used to take me shooting. I could shoot pretty well. And as I say, that they were shorter drivers, and I was always in demand to drive somewhere. Orb Gale, our lieutenant, always used me as a sort of a chauffeur. So I drove his car, drove him wherever he wanted to go.
Were you told that you'd be going to New Guinea?
Yeah, we volunteered to go to New Guinea.
And did you think that you would be actually going into action, or did you think you'd just be for garrison duties?
Well, I wanted to go into action. That was my aiming thing. That's what I volunteered for. What
do you remember of the preparations at Darley, and do you remember having Christmas dinner just before you embarked on a journey to Sydney? Do you remember Christmas dinner at Darley? And did you remember the train trip up to Sydney?
No, I remember my family coming up and seeing me. As far as the Christmas dinner, well, I couldn't have been very impressed. I don't remember too much about that. But I guess there was one, but no, don't mean.
And did you remember
bells.
going on a street parade in Melbourne before you left?
Did I?
A big street parade with the 39.
Yeah, we did. We marched through the city before we embarked for New South Wales, that we went up to and embarked in Sydney on.
At Woolloomooloo, you went to Woolloomooloo station and then down to the docks.
Down to the docks and then up onto the ship, which was a very big ship.
Was it your first time away from Victoria?
What?
Was it your first time away from Melbourne?
Oh, I can't remember that. Maybe. I travelled around Victoria, but I can't remember going interstate. I haven't got any memories of interstate travel.
Yeah. And did you remember your friends who you were with? Do you remember anyone in particular that you were best mates with?
Only funny. And there was another fellow that was very friendly with me, and I taught him to drive because, as I say, there were still short of drivers. And one fellow lived in Richmond and knew my parents' company, and he became friends with me. And that was Andrew, what's his name? Ken Huggett. And so I taught Ken to drive, and we told him that he could drive, but it was only me teaching him. But he could never get the idea of changing gears down, and he always crashed his gears, so they called him he had a nickname that went with him right through the war. I'll tell you what it is in a minute. I can't forget it. I can't remember it at the moment. But Butch, but they call him Butch because he made a butch of changing gears. So that was Ken Huggett, and he was a friend of mine always right through. A couple of other fellows there that I'm forgetting their names.
Doesn't matter. Were you told what you'd be doing when you got to New Guinea? Were you told you'd be transport or?
I remember getting to New Guinea, getting off the boat and marching out to the 7 Mile Drome, and we were on the side of the 7 Mile Drome. And there again my family came into it because when my mother knew I was going to New Guinea, she insisted I took a mosquito net, and I was only one in the battalion with a mosquito net.
You're very lucky.
And there were about 5 fellows used to sit under that mosquito net every day. But that was put in by my mother, insisted I took it. So I had a mosquito net.
Because it took a long time for the ship to be unloaded because the supplies were packed the other way.
And then when we had so few drivers too, that's where I spent most of my time, was unloading the ship and driving trucks, taking stuff out and dumping it in areas right around Northby.
Did you actually remember much about the journey on the boat over? Did you remember anything about the voyage over?
I'd been growing up at Mount Liza on the water with boats and just loved the water. And I spent my whole time up on deck, and they gave me a job looking for mines, and I'd do sing up on the bow looking out for submarines and mines. I don't know whether they were pulling my leg, but I used to stand up there and do that because I never got seasick, and or anything like that. That reason.
Can you remember the camp at the 7 Mile, what it was like when you first went there? What was it like? Just describe.
When you say what was it like,
What was
it wasn't like it wasn't like one of the Melbourne hotels or anything. It was just an army camp, a tent, and we dug a hole in to get in, but we didn't dig very deep, but we had to dig a hole for protection in case it was bombed. And then after we had our first bombing raid, we made that hole about 10 times as deep as what it originally was. It was only a scratch on the ground, but after first being introduced to bombs, we dug them all a lot deeper.
When the bombing raid started, did that send an indication that the war was real? How did you feel when the bombing raids first actually started?
I thought they were going to hit me on the head. They always, a bomb coming down, the noise of it always sounded as though it was coming in your hole with you, so a bit scary, yeah. But whether that means the...
what was your cookhouse like, and do you remember your meals? What were your meals like?
Well, that's the thing, that there's a fellow here, I've been reading, since I've been here, I've been reading those books over there, which are large type. I've never read books with large type before, but there were a lot of county ones, so I've been reading them, and everyone I pick up has got the name in the book of somebody that's taken it out, and it was our Sergeant Cook from the 39th Battalion, Laff. We all knew him as Laff, and nearly every one of these books, and he was here for about, I think he was here for 12 years or something, and I used to pick him up to take him to the reunions, but now Laff's passed on, but every time I get a book I look in the back and here's Laff's name, so he read them all while he was here.
And what do you remember eating mainly?
Pork, beans, and I never ever got sick of them. I still liked them. Beans and tomato sauce, but I think we used to call it pork and beans, but we never found the pork, you know.
After you'd been there a couple of months, the 75th Kitty Hawk Squadron arrived at the 7 Mile Strip. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we shot them up. Yeah, I think it was only 2 was able to take off again after, something like that, 2 I think. And then, which they did, and they shot down the first plane we saw, Japanese plane we saw shot down. But they came in the same as the Japanese used to come in and strafe us, and they came in with the excitement. They fired a burst of machine gun, and we all thought that they were Japanese, but they were only a burst of welcome they fired. But they got a pretty rough welcome because everybody had something. From a person's point of view, a bombing raid, you couldn't do anything, or you had to get in a hole. But when it was a raid where they were machine gunning and the planes were low, you could shoot back at them. So I think everybody had a shot at them. So, and as they were Australians and we didn't know, we were shooting the wrong plane.
Mm-hmm. So your days were spent mainly unloading ships and supplies. And what did you do at night? Do you remember doing anything at night?
No, I think we were pretty tired. We just went to sleep.
Do you remember any mischief that some of the boys got into?
Mischief? How far along the line are we going? Mischief. Are we still in Australia, or are we out of Australia now?
At Port Moresby.
Port Moresby. Well, I remember those bombing raids as you were just talking about, and as I was down at the wharf and unloading the McDewey in those days, and we were unloading it, and there was a bombing raid, we all had to get off the wharf as fast as where trucks would take us, get away because the Japs were coming in. And they did bomb and they did hit the McDewey. We had our first casualties on the McDewey. And I'd driven off the wharf and up onto the hill at the back, and I watched the whole of the bombing raid from up on the mountain there, looking down. And that was the end of McDewey. It got sunk and they took it out. It ran aground over the other side of the harbour. And after that, everything was in Moresby. All the people went back to Australia, and the army fellows moved in and all had comfy chairs like this at their tents because they moved out and left the doors open of the shops. So we all helped themselves, and that's how it was for some time. And I think probably about a week later, or a couple of weeks later, a bomb hit the corner of Burns Phillip store, one of the bombs, and it blew open the cellars that were underneath, and nobody knew that those cellars were there. And I happened to be driving a truck around the area, and those cellars were full of French wines of all sorts, and I still didn't drink, mind you, but I knew my mates liked it, so I loaded the truck up with all these wines and took them back, and we had to keep them cool, so they all went into our slit trenches. And one I can always remember a fellow coming up from the cookhouse, and the boys poured him out a whole tumbler full of different liqueurs, French liqueurs, and he drank the whole glass. And he pranced around like a thoroughbred racehorse. Went down to the cookhouse and got out on the table and walked right down the dining room table. And Skipper Kelly, Captain Kelly, caught him, so he spent about 3 months washing dishes after that. But that was all wine from Burns Phillips.
What was your discipline like there? Did you have to salute officers?
No, never had any of that sort of thing. Left that for the bombs. And
what did you wear? Just shorts and...
We were wearing just shorts and a hat, no shirt most of the time. But then some of the officials came, a general came up there and said we'd all end up with cancer and something, and so it was we were.
So while you're at Port Moresby, your main job was driving the water tanker. Would you?
Well, once we got the ships unloaded and we settled down, and I got a job. They gave me a job driving the water cart to keep people supplied with water, and we got a big water tower thing at the 3 mile area, and we went down there and filled up our water tank and took out to the different companies. And then we had the Coral Sea battle, and they thought the Japs were going to land around Moresby. So the whole of the 39th were spread out all like Bootless Bay and all around the coast. So that meant the water had to be carted right out to Bootless Bay, which was a long trip, and to keep them supplied with water. So we'd go backwards and forwards all the time, had to have their tea, you know, and every bit of water had to be carted. So I drove about 3 or 4 trips to Bootless Bay every day, and in a truck on a very, very rough road. And it was a brand new truck when I started, and after 10,000 miles it had shook itself to pieces all the mud guards had fallen off, but it still worked. And we carted water across to wherever the troops were, to a cookhouse, and they all had something to put in. Now, while I was doing that, the first of the Americans came, and they landed and they put them out at Bootless Bay.
Was it just a work crew? The Americans, were they just Negroes, or they?
No, I think they were a battalion of action. And they had everything you could imagine, even fold-up beds and canvas and cartons of cigarettes, but they had no water. And they put out there and they didn't have any water. So I was going out carting water to the 39th Battalion out there, and they pulled me up and begged for water because they didn't have any water at the cookhouse. And so I was able to give them a little bit of water, but it was all, I couldn't take them. So they offered me cigarettes and all sorts of things like that, so I went and did an extra trip back to Moresby and got a load of water for them and drove it out, and they gave me 2 fold beds, filled my cabin with cartons of cigarettes, which I took back to the boys, and gave them their water, and they were happy that would start them off. They then later on got a tanker of their own, so but that was their first lot of water.
So did you keep the beds for yourself? Or
yeah, I had one. Yeah, it was an army fold-up canvas, you know. Like
that would have been a luxury. Maybe everyone else was sleeping on the ground. So
yeah, I gave one to my mate. I think that was Ernie Wilson. Yeah.
What sort of truck was it? Your truck, was it an old Chev or a?
No, it was a brand new Ford, V8 Ford truck. It was a tank on the back, like a petrol tanker, but not as big as petrol tankers you see today, but a small one.
But whereabouts did you fill up with water?
At the 3 Mile.
At the Loki River?
3 Mile. It was a bit further. 3 Mile was Murray Barracks. Was a bit further on than that one. Must have been about the 5 miles. So, and the road went off there straight to Bootless Bay. Coming out from Moresby, you drive out towards the 7 miles. When you got to this place, it did a right-hand turn and you went to Bootless Bay. On that corner, there was a tank, a pipe. It was a tap, and we could drive underneath it and turn it on, fill our tankers.
So how far would have it been to Bootless Bay?
I don't know, I can't remember. It was a long drive. I know I just lived in my car, lived in the cabin. As soon as I stopped, I went to sleep, and they'd emptied it up and wake me up, and I'd drive back again. And I did that round the clock pretty well.
But you didn't do any other training?
No.
Just driving?
No, I just drove.
How were you paid? And how often did you get letters and parcels from home?
As far as paid was concerned, that never even ever interested me, because I didn't have to support anybody, and my job was paying me all the time I was away, and the army paid me, so I was pretty well financial. I never had any to worry about that. How I paid, it just went into my pay book. I didn't even bother to draw it because I always had enough money.
So your time you spent there in Port Moresby, you were quite happy doing what you were doing?
Yeah.
As the Japanese gradually headed south, were you told that you'd have to troops would be assembled ready to go into the Owen Stanleys?
No, I knew. I think we heard that they'd landed at Leigh, and we went over there and Stanley's to meet them. They were coming our way and we were going over. That's how I understood it.
So how did you first set off on the Kokoda Track?
Well, that's a good story too, because as I tell you, I'm before all the troops went, and they hadn't travelled over the track, and they gathered up some horses. I don't know where they got the horses from, but they got them up to Owen's Corner there, and there was a few boys there, that really country boys that'd grown up with horses and could ride horses, and they were going to ride them up over the track. So they headed, I can always remember one of the lads getting on a horse and grabbing hold of him thing and to throw his leg up on the horse. And the horse had one of those big ulcers on its thing, you know, from a tropical ulcer, and it was on its neck, and he grabbed hold of it, and the horse stood right up on its back legs, straight up, and he was halfway up, getting onto, but he was quite a cowboy in his ride, and he was able to manage to still stay on and with the horse prancing right up, and winnowing and carrying on, and he quietened it down and steadied it off. But anyway, the horses went off down the track and got to the first river, and there was so much mud they sank down to their knees in the mud, and they couldn't use the horses at all. So that was the end of using horses. So we then started off walking with some of the native boys as carriers. I had a little boy that wanted to carry my rifle for me, and my pack, and they looked after me pretty well, those fuzzy wussies. And so we plodded on.
So what was your job, to clear the track or to put in?
No, to put up these little stopping places, which were at each building, each one. They're all the 39th blokes at each one. I remember, I just can't forget the names of the towns along the villages along the line.
Kargi and Efogi.
Kargi. I was at Kargi. I set up Kargi. But before
and you were just building little huts and setting up a telephone line?
Yeah, we laid the telephone line, and the natives built the hut, but they cut down trees and put that, and they got the grass, they cut the grass and bent it all over and
made little shelters.
Thatched the roof, and that was there. So
what section would have you been with then? Did you volunteer for that?
Yeah, I volunteered. That's what I said. Captain Kelly was in charge of it, and it was called Lines of Communication to Kokoda.
And how many of the 39th would have that been?
With all 39 fellows that were volunteers.
That volunteered?
Yeah, with Captain Kelly.
And how many men was it approximately? 30 or?
It'd be about 30, I would say.
And you had about 50 natives with you?
Oh no, we had hundreds of natives, but I had 50 with me. And
well, you would have had to carry supplies as well to keep
that's
you
what
going.
they were bringing. They went back. They bring up they put all their gear on the ground. We give them an okay, and then they run off back down to the village back further, get another load, which they carried up. And they carried, I think it was 30 pounds, roughly, per person, the native boys carried.
So how far up did you get? Did you get right to the top of the Owen Stanleys, up to Ishirava, and did you get down to Kokoda?
No, I didn't get down to Kokoda. I went to, I to B, from Kargi across to setting up the lake there.
At Loyola?
Yeah, and from there down to Templeton's Crossing.
You went to Templeton's Crossing. What was that like? What was at Templeton's Crossing?
Well, I haven't got great memories there because any times while I was down, I took a load of natives down carrying stuff. We dumped our load and then we returned back.
Go back.
Oh, it was lots of mud. And
What was the jungle like then? Was it dense?
it was pretty dense, yeah, lots of places was pretty dense. Always remember one of the things that when I was driving a truck first of all in Darley, I had to go down to the train to meet the first load of boys coming into the 39th. And when I got to the station to pick up a load of boys in the truck, one of the fellows got off. I'd been in school with him at Frankston High School, and that was Ian Charwood. And Ian Charwood worked in the botanical gardens, and he'd done horticulture. And when, as soon as I saw him, I got him in the front with me, and I always contacted him, always, we were friends. And when he got into the jungle, he was always looking for orchids, and other people would never see that there were orchids growing on the trees, on the jungle. Nobody would have noticed, but Ian did, and he was always looking for orchids. And he worked in the Fitzroy Gardens in the orchid thing before he went to the 39th, and then when he came out of the army, he set up a horticultural place in Mornington. He's passed on now, but he was a 39th fellow.
So how long did it take you setting up huts and the telephone line? How long were you away?
I was there before the 39th, and I was there after 39th withdrawn. So I stayed up there longer with the 14th, 16th, 23rd, I think it was, battalions. They were 6 Divi, came back from the Middle East.
So you set up the huts?
When they withdrew, I withdrew with them.
After you'd set up the wires and the huts and everything, you came back and you were camped up?
No, I stayed there, and I.
So where did you stay?
At Kargi.
I stayed at Kargi.
And I had a line through, and it wouldn't go right through to Captain Kelly down at Noah's Corner, but it was trans.
And what was your job there at Kargi then?
To look after all the supplies and collect them and keep them all dry and pick them up. And that's when they first did the first dropping of aircraft, and we built this pit hut, the natives all built, and the first drops that they dropped supplies, they put into I forgot what aircraft it was, but a bomber, light bomber, and it flew over and opened its bomb bays and everything dropped out. And it fell on our hut and squashed it. To build the bloody thing again. And so that was the first drop. And not only did it drop, the bag, boxes of ammunition, when it hit the ground, the lead in the top of a bullet is heavier than the bottom part. The lead is still going on, and the other part is off, so all the bullets come out with this shape. They were like a Z shape, because the lead was heavier and it went further than the cartridge part. And so when it hit the ground, they were all useless. We did sit there and sort of put lots of them on, didn't look too bad, and we'd put them in and out of a rifle to see that we could use them. So we picked out all the best of them.
So how long would have you been there at Cargi? A couple of months, 3 or 4 months?
I don't know. I can't think. It must have been 3 or 4 months I was here.
So you would have seen the rest of the battalion when they marched up, they marched through?
Yeah, all came through us. Yeah.
And you would have also seen them coming back wounded?
Yeah. A lot of them. Some of them were, I always remember some of them with all their bullets in them and bits and pieces.
When you were there at Cargi or Myola, how did you know that the supply planes would be coming in? Did they telephone through? No, I think we just heard them. We heard the planes coming right down through them and we'd get out to catch them. But Cargi was never any good because it was right on the top of a hill, a mountain, and if the supplies didn't land right where we are, they missed it, it went for about a mile further down into the gully and never ever found it. So all that stuff went off down there. So it was never ever a good dropping area, Cargi, but that's why we I can always remember there was an old doctor who was a Angau fellow, and he lived in New Guinea looking after the natives. Dr. Vernon?
Yeah. And he had flown over, backwards and forwards, over the mountains, and he knew about this dried up lake. And he suggested that that would be a good dropping area. And but nobody knew how to get there. So they contacted some of the natives and they, Manari was a tribe that lived in that area, and some of the boys from Manari knew where that lake was. So that doctor, another fellow from Anga, myself and a group of natives, we all went searching and we found this dried up lake, and that's how it was set up then. And then it became the main dropping area, and the planes would come down, fly very low. We could see the fellows in there pushing everything out the door, and then they'd go up over the trees the other end. And
so how often were the supplies dropped? Every couple of days?
Oh no, every day, all the time they were dropping it in.
And how were they?
We had to collect it and get it out of the way before the next one came in, so we wouldn't get hit with the flying stuff.
And how were the supplies wrapped?
Well, so in the first place they opened it, but then they wrapped them up in blankets and dropped them all out, all done up in a big cushion sort of thing. Biscuits, but the biscuits all ended up as broken biscuits. We used to make good porridge out of the army biscuits that were crushed because they hit the ground so hard. No, that's about, I think of all the ammunition was all wrapped up to make springy, so it took away.
Did the ammunition come in boxes?
Originally those ones that I tell you were all burnt, all bent. They were in boxes. I just forget how they came on. I think they might have used the parachutes for ammunition later on.
But the other stuff was literally just pushed out of the plane?
Food and all that sort of stuff.
Just potluck?
Bully meat, bully beef and all that sort of stuff.
Beef and biscuits?
Yeah, and all that sort of stuff.
I'd like to get you to tell us about the 3-inch mortar bombs.
Yeah.
What happened when they were dropped to you and then you sent them down to the troops?
Well, when they hit the ground, it armed the bomb. And when the bomb is armed, anything it touches, it explodes. A mortar bomb hits the ground, and as soon as it hits the ground, it explodes. So it doesn't make a hole in the ground, it explodes and chops people's legs off or damage them. It spreads out like that rather than dig in. If it dug in, it'd go up in the air. But so it's very, once it's armed, it's very touchy. So if it hits a twig, it'll explode. So them being dropped out of a plane armed the bombs, which later on, the first ones they put into the mortars to fire them, and the explosion at the bottom of the mortar to shoot the bomb out, the bomb exploded in the mortar and blew the crew and everybody up.
Mm-hmm. Who did you have working with you there?
In at Cargie.
At Cargie.
Well, there's some fellow that I left Moresby with, and he was a Frenchman, and he came from New Caledonia, I think it was, and he was with Angau and looking after natives. He was used to working with natives, so he looked after natives and I looked after the supply. It was always a bit of a joke along the line, because Captain Kelly, Skipper Kelly as we knew him, was first world captain and a pretty hard nut, and he always worried about little Jack going out with this Frenchman out in the bush together. Didn't think I was very safe. But that was only his joke with having with me.
So how many natives did you have coming and going? Were
How
there
many?
Hundreds and hundreds sending out the supplies. Was that
I
every
think we
day?
had something like 200, but I was connected with getting 50 to come and work for them, and they were all. And that was an interesting thing too. Also, what I had to do, every native wouldn't cook for a native from another village, so each group had to have his own cook. So I had to line them all up at food time, and each one had their cook boy stand out in front, and he was to cook for 8 people, so I give him enough rice for 8 people, and the next one be cooking for 6 people, so because only 6 from his village, and they'd only cook from their village. They wouldn't cook for another village.
So that was also one of your jobs, to share out the rations to
I
feed
rationed
them.
all the food out to the native boys, yeah.
While you were there, did you actually see any Japanese while you were there?
No. The only Japanese I saw was when I was with the second Battalion later on.
So what happened when you came back to Port Moresby?
After, I remember coming back, and I didn't come back with I came back with the 14th I think they were, 14th Battalion. I just walked back with them, and then found Skipper Kelly. I went to him, he looked after me.
Did you ever get sick?
I had malaria hundreds of times, I don't know, didn't worry me. Just a bad fever, and I get the shivers badly, but I think we all got that.
So you'd probably been there about 15 months or so. Were you granted leave back to Australia?
Only when the battalion came back to Australia.
So you came back with the battalion.
Mm.
Where was your last camp in Port Moresby? Were you up on Hombrom Bluff?
Yeah, that's where they were when I came back. That's where I joined them on Hombrom Bluff. I've forgotten that. Yeah, right up on the top. But that must have been just prior to them coming back to Australia. I wasn't up there for long. That might have been a couple of days or so, because as I say, they all came back and I was sort of coming in at the end.
So your main job was really handing out the supplies and taking care of the supplies.
That's right.
When did you get leave, and did you come back to Melbourne, or did you go to the Tablelands in Queensland?
Went to the Tablelands, I think. I think we went to the Tablelands, and then we got leave from there. We travelled down by train. We just about finished up. I travelled down by train down to Melbourne and had leave then.
What were some of your strong memories of New Guinea when you were camped up there at Kargi?
Well, I liked New Guinea, and I travelled over a lot of New Guinea, and after I was married and my children all grew up, I took my wife back to New Guinea, and we flew round to every one of those little places that she couldn't get over how many aeroplanes, because every time we flew from Wow to Lae or something, we had to get in another aeroplane. So we were in and out, and I visited all those spots that I had visited during the war. And welcomed by the New Guinea RSL at Moresby, and I went there for dinner, and I said where I was, and there was one of the boys that was in my carrier group, a native boy, jumped up and was so excited to see me.
And the natives were great to help
to
the 39th.
Yeah. Couldn't have managed without them, no.
And were they treated fairly well by the Australians?
Oh yeah, we treated them pretty well, I reckon. Well, depends whether you compare it with today's standards. They're quite different, but we didn't have nothing on. We didn't hurt them in any way, and we sort of did our best for them.
So you would have come back to Australia for your leave, and then to the Tablelands.
Yeah.
And you probably had leave in Melbourne.
Yes.
And what did you do after that? After the 39th was
we went back
disbanded.
to the 39th and then we marched round the corner and went into the 2nd Battalion. So that was the last.
And what did you do in the second?
Went into the mortar platoon, and that's how I know all about these bombs. Mortar platoon.
And where did the second serve? Where were they sent?
We made a landing. We went to Ida and went on ships and landing barges, and we landed at Wee-Wack.
Wee-Wack.
And I was at the back of Wee-Wack, right back in the highlands when war finished.
Who was your sergeant there? Do you remember?
Yes, and I still talk with him. His name was
Doesn't matter.
Ken McPherson. And he was from the second. He was in Italy. Not that. Where's the games going to be next week?
Athens.
So what was your job in the second? Were you still in supplies and transport? Or
No. I was in the mortar platoon.
Mortar platoon. And did you see any action?
Yeah. Saw a bit of action there. They got a fellow in there who sergeant wounded, got a decoration. In the 39th, he was
Not Vic Austin.
Vic Austin.
You were with him?
Yeah, Vic. And when Vic was at we must have
You were with him when he was wounded?
Yeah.
Was
And
that
Ken Huckett was too.
was that Lieutenant Chown's platoon?
But,
Was that Lieutenant Chown's platoon who won the Victoria Cross?
yeah, but I wasn't in his platoon. No.
So how long would have you been there at Wee-Wack?
Oh, we only went there and then we pushed the Japs back and followed them back into the mountain. And I was in the back of the mountains when the war finished.
So what was your response when you found out the war had finished?
Well, we had a bit of a problem there because we knew the war had finished, but the Japs didn't. And they had to put signs down the tracks to tell the Japs the war was over, because they didn't have any correspondence with their country. And that was the thing. We actually had a couple of our fellows killed after the war.
What was your rank when you were in the second?
Still a private.
Still a private?
I didn't have to be anything else. The company was paying me.
And how did you get to Wee-Wack? You would have flown in somewhere?
No, we landed from barges. Barges on the beach, and then we ran up the beach, you know.
So you would have gone from Port Moresby, or did you go from Australia?
No, Idaby.
Idaby.
No, when Idaby we walked right along the that's a good question. I'm a bit
About the
lost.
burnt out truck that you came across.
Well, it always stays in my memory as a good laugh because of the tension of being so quiet when we're moving up on the Japanese, who had snipers and were shooting at us. And we came across this burnt out truck that the Air Force had blown up, and underneath it there's a skeleton of a man, because the Japanese weren't as keen on us at burying their people, they just left them. The skeleton was stretched out underneath this burnt out old truck. And one of our fellows said in a very hoarse voice, "Wouldn't you think somebody would tell that silly old bastard he hasn't got a chance in hell of getting that thing to go?" And that's what he was talking about, the skeleton. And of course we all had to laugh. And that was just when the tension was there and we were all laughing, we should be quiet.
And where were you
It's always
when
stuck
you
in
finished up with your army service? In Melbourne.
In Melbourne.
In
yeah.
Melbourne?
Yeah. But before that, I was not having any points, not being married, or and the different ones went home. So I stayed at Leigh for a long time.
You stayed at Leigh for a long time?
After until everybody got home, and then we came home. And out near the Children's Hospital in Melbourne, what's the name of that area?
Royal Park.
Royal Park, yeah. Went up to Royal Park, and that's where I discharged.
Very good. Well, I would like to thank you very much on behalf of the 39th Battalion Historical Unit for this very interesting story.
I hope you get something out of that.
Thank you.